I think I'm unmuted and recording started. So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Philip White, and I'll be giving today's webinar presentation on the ResStock team's newest data release, which is the 2024.2 dataset. So before I start, I'd like to thank the hard work of my colleagues in the publication of this dataset. So thanks to Elena Present, Chioke Harris, Jess Brossman, Tony Fontanini, Noel Marquette, and Rajendra Athikari. So first, let's discuss the background of ResStock's dataset releases. So in 2021, we released the End-Use Load Profiles dataset. This describes the energy consumption of the national baseline building stock with both annual and time series outputs. Since then, we've released 2022.1, which some people might know as End-Use Saving Shapes, which describes the baseline stock plus 10 upgrade packages with time series and annual results. Earlier this year, we released 2024.1, which described the baseline stock in 260 upgrades exclusively with annual results. And today, we're discussing the 2024.2 release, which describes the baseline stock and 15 upgrade packages with both time series and annual results. You can think of this as a sequel or a successor to the 2022.1 dataset. So let's give you a taste of what to expect from this webinar. I'll start out briefly overviewing the ResStock tool. I'll describe updates in the 2024.2 dataset compared to our last time series release. I'll detail the measure packages in 2024.2 and end with some words on how to access this dataset. So let's start out discussing the ResStock tool and answer how it models the US building stock. ResStock at its core is a building stock energy model. That is, its primary purpose is to model the energy consumption of a building stock. At a high level, it combines an extensive building stock characterization database, physics-based computer modeling, and high-performance computing. Here's the ResStock workflow. First, we describe the US building stock quantitatively. Then we sample the description to create a statistical representation of the building stock. And we model that sample using Energy Plus and OpenStudio. These are building energy modeling softwares with decades of DOE investment. And then we model changes to the sample, things like energy efficiency and electrification. And then we publish it publicly, all of it. This includes the description, output data, models, results, aggregations, visualizations, and documentation. We use this methodology because it hits a sweet spot between simple and fast and complex and slow. Lack of granularity, going for the simple, fast answer can lead to bad conclusions, but too much complexity can also be a problem. Sometimes by the time you have a conclusion, it's too late for it to be useful, or sometimes excessive granularity can lead to bad conclusions just at a finer scale. So this is how we build our building stock characterization. It's a set of over 100 dependent probability distributions, and we use the best available data, sources like the Residential Energy Consumption Survey from the EIA and US Census data. And we built these dependent housing characteristic distributions. We know that if a home is in the mid-Atlantic in the 1980s, it has a specific probability of having gas heating fuel, a specific probability of having R30 attic insulation, and so on. ResStock works at the dwelling unit level. Sometimes I'll use the word home or household, but we do not model buildings. We model dwelling units. For example, this means we model an individual apartment rather than a whole apartment building, or an individual home in a duplex rather than the duplex itself. So we sample these distributions, 550,000 samples to be exact in this data set. That's one model for every 252 dwelling units that exist in the US. This number is based on previous analyses of how many samples were needed to get results to converge for different subsets of the stock. Then we model those samples using the Energy Plus simulation engine, which calculates heat transfer and energy flows at sub-hourly time steps. Each model we run is a fully spec'd out home that could exist, and in all probability, it does exist. They have real characteristics and representative variability in their characteristics. So here is a sample dwelling model. The input data looks a lot like audit data. Information on the location, occupants, vintage, geometry, insulation, HVAC, appliances, and dozens more are here with our housing characteristics. So if we were lucky enough to have you attend our webinar for the previous time series data release, uh, what I just covered is probably quite familiar. But now I'll talk about updates to ResStock that are new and included in this particular dataset release. Our input assumptions for variable speed heat pumps have been updated to reflect data from the NEAT cold climate air source heat pump list. These updates allow for heat pump modeling to be more reflective of actual performance and operating conditions of cold climate heat pumps. Geothermal heat pump modeling has gone through a massive overhaul in ResStock. Performance curves have been updated, varied ground thermal conductivities have been added, and inputs have been expanded according to industry guidance. If you are curious about the details of these changes, see our technical documentation for this dataset release. And we've integrated the recently released REX 2020 dataset into our housing characteristic distributions. This includes updating housing characteristics like floor area and attic type, information about appliances, HVAC set points, and correlating these characteristics with household income and renter-owner status. So now it's time to get to the main course of the webinar. Let's talk about the dataset we're releasing and how the dataset utilizes these updates I just described to you. So compared to 2022.1, which is the best point comparison to today's release, this release features 5 more measure packages and the addition of utility bill outputs. We modeled both TMY3 weather and historical weather from 2018. Annual and time series results are available, as well as our staple outputs like energy consumption and carbon emissions. And then our time series files for individual models include indoor air temperature data, which has been highly requested by people we talk to here at the ResStock team. Here is an overview of the dataset's measure packages. And to clarify, when I say measure package, I mean a combination of 1 or more upgrades to the existing building stock. Our measure packages center on 5 different heat pumps. Each heat pump is then paired with a light touch envelope improvement in packages 6 through 10, and then a heat pump water heater and appliance electrification package is added for packages 11 through 15. These measure packages were selected through consideration of feedback from people like you. So please remember, if there's anything you'd like to see featured in a ResStock dataset that isn't here, let us know. Stay until the end of the presentation for how to contact the ResStock team with your feedback. So now let's dive into the details of the measure packages and see some example results along the way. But first, we've got to talk about some sizing methodologies for the heat pumps in this dataset. 2 methods are used: a max load sizing methodology and sizing according to ACCA Manual S and J. So max load refers to sizing the heat pump to the largest design load between cooling and heating. ACCA Manual S and J sizes on cooling load with a couple oversizing allowances depending on compressor speed. 15% oversizing for single stage compressors and 30% for variable speed compressors. An extra ton of refrigeration is added if the climate is dry and cold. So in this dataset, we only sized the ACCA Manual S and J for the heat pump in measure package 1. It's a single stage heat pump for ducted homes, so that means it has a 15% oversizing allowance, and dwellings in cold and dry climates will have an extra ton of refrigeration. Speaking of that heat pump, let's take a look at measure package 1. This is an Energy Star rated air-to-air heat pump with electric backup. Sometimes these air-to-air types of heat pumps are referred to as air source heat pumps. I tend to use these terms interchangeably throughout the presentation. The electric backup heat system is integrated into the heat pump and will be active when the heat pump cannot meet the set point. This heat pump has a SEER 1 rating of 16 and an HSPF 1 rating of 9.2. You'll see SEER 1 and HSPF 1 ratings for all of our air-to-air heat pumps. They describe the efficiency of the heat pump for cooling and heating, respectively. This heat pump has a capacity retention of 50% at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So what this means is that when the temperature is 5 Fahrenheit outside, only 50% of its initial rated capacity can be utilized. And then if it's installed into a household that is only partially conditioned, we make sure it conditions 100% of the dwelling. You'll see there's a few specifications for the heat pump. There's a few different specifications for the heat pump on whether the dwelling has ducts or not. For ducted homes, this heat pump is sized to ACA manual S&J. It's a single stage compressor and it's centrally ducted. For non-ducted homes, it is sized to max load, has a variable speed compressor, is a mini split, and any existing set point offsets are removed. The max load sizing for non-ducted dwellings is chosen because of the prevalence of variable speed compressors in mini split heat pumps. On to measure package 2. This is a high efficiency cold climate air-to-air heat pump with electric backup. For both ducted and non-ducted homes, this heat pump has a SEER 1 rating of 20 and an HSPF 1 rating of 11. It's sized to max load, still uses integrated electric backup heat, is variable speed, and has a capacity retention of 90% at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Set point offsets are removed for both duct types of dwellings, and the dwelling is 100% conditioned. As you might expect, the ducted households get a centrally ducted heat pump, while the non-ducted homes receive a mini split heat pump. Some major differences from the previous heat pump package outside of SEER and the HSPF ratings are that both ducted and non-ducted are variable speed compressors with set point offsets removed and the capacity retention of 90% at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So these details really help the heat pump operate in cold conditions. On to measure package 3. This is an ultra high efficiency air-to-air heat pump with electric backup. It looks very similar to heat pump number 2, except with higher SEER and HSPF ratings, which are near the highest efficiency ratings that are widely available on the market right now. Every other detail is the exact same. So now let's look at some example results from these measure packages. And a few notes before we dive into these figures. Most results I'm showing are on a state level basis. Specifically, these results are for the state of Colorado, home to NREL, come visit us. Other geographies that you can easily down select to in this data set are IECC climate zone, Building America climate zone, and independent system operator or regional transmission organization regions, which are related to how the grid is operated. Results you see in this presentation are not necessarily going to be able to be extrapolated to other states, as energy consumption trends are highly dependent on housing characteristics, geography, weather tendencies, existing heating fuel, HVAC types, and occupant behavior. So let's take a look at this figure. On the left is annual electricity consumption by end use, and on the right is natural gas consumption by end use. The baseline scenario, as well as the first 3 heat pump packages, which we just went over, are shown. First off, we can see the lack of natural gas heating pretty starkly in the heat pump packages. I'd also point you to the backup heat utilization. The variable speed heat pumps of package 2 and 3 utilize less backup heat because of the high capacity retention fractions, multi-speed compressors, and sizing to max load. But let's see how this plays out on a temporal scale rather than an annual. These figures show average electricity demand on a day in Colorado in mid-February. Note that I am calling it the average electricity demand because it's averaged over simulation time steps. For this data set, our simulation time step is 15 minutes. On the left is measure package 1, which features the single stage ducted heat pump. On the right is the high efficiency cold climate heat pump. You can see how the backup heat contributes to the peak for measure package 1, and that its peak is peakier than measure package 2's. Much of this decrease in peak is because of measure package 2's lower, or in this day's case, non-existent backup heating utilization. This lack of backup heat utilization is likely because of its cold climate specifications, like the high capacity retention fraction at 5 degrees Fahrenheit and being sized to max load. So now let's pivot to a different style of heat pump. Measure package 4 is the Energy Star rated air-to-air heat pump we saw in package 1, but with backup heating provided by its existing heating system. This means that instead of swapping out the heating system for the heat pump, the existing system is retained to supplement the heating provided by the new heat pump. So a few notes on this. Only dwellings with non-electric heating fuels received this upgrade. Dwellings with a ducted furnace install this heat pump in line with the fuel furnace. So this means that both systems can never be operating at the same time. To deal with this, the compressor has a lockout temperature of 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and the backup heat has a lockout temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The backup system will kick on when the heat pump cannot meet the load below 40 Fahrenheit, and the heat pump will never be active below 5 Fahrenheit. For non-ducted homes, coincident heating can occur. You can imagine this situation happening with radiators turning on when a mini split heat pump cannot maintain the set point. So how does this look in the annual results? About what you would expect. So here is measure package 1, measure package 4. These are the same heat pump specifications, except for the heat pump backup heat method. You can see that measure package 4 has no electricity backup heat, but has a significant amount of natural gas backup heat. And now let's look at a newcomer to ResStock datasets, the geothermal heat pump. In this dataset, only ducted homes will receive geothermal heat pumps. Its specifications are an energy efficiency ratio of 20.5 and a rated coefficient of performance, or COP, of 4.0. It's sized to max load and has no backup system present. Like the other heat pumps, it'll condition the entire dwelling. An advantage to these geothermal systems is that their thermal reservoir is a constant temperature, rather than being dependent on ambient temperature like the air-to-air heat pumps. So let's see how that looks in some example results. These figures are for that same mid-February day in Colorado. On the left is the cold climate air source heat pump, and on the right is the geothermal heat pump. Note that these figures show only demand from homes with ducts, since the geothermal heat pump only applies to homes with ducts. The advantage of that constant temperature thermal reservoir can be seen when comparing the morning peaks. The morning peak for the geothermal heat pump is about half a gigawatt less compared to the high efficiency cold climate heat pump. And then if we zoom out and look at some distributions of total energy savings, this means that total energy savings, meaning these are savings across all fuels on a per dwelling basis between the 5 heat pump measure packages. The box plot for each heat pump package represents the interquartile range of savings per dwelling of the measure package. The top and bottom whiskers represent the 98th and 2nd percentile of savings respectively for those curious. So you can see that total energy savings occur in the vast majority of the dwellings we model for each measure package. So now let's outline the next 5 measure packages, which includes each heat pump I just featured, plus a light touch envelope package. The envelope package includes attic floor insulation improvements to IECC levels, which means higher R value, depending on how cold the climate zone is, and then general air sealing for leaky homes. If a home has infiltration that's greater than 10 air changes per hour, its air changes per hour is reduced by 30%. And to note, these envelope measures apply only if a heat pump upgrade also applies to the dwelling. That is to say, there are no dwellings in measure upgrades 6 through 10 that receive the envelope upgrade, but not the heat pump upgrade. So let's look at some example results that include the envelope measures. Here's the annual electricity and natural gas consumption results by end use for baseline, measure package 1, which is that Energy Star heat pump, and measure package 6, which is that same heat pump with the light touch envelope package. And reminder, these are still limited to Colorado. And as you'd expect, the envelope upgrade reduces both heating and heat pump backup usage of the standalone heat pump measure package. And now let's go through measure packages 11 through 15. This includes the addition of heat pump water heaters and appliance electrification. For appliance electrification, if the existing dryer or range and oven use natural gas or propane, They're replaced with an Energy Star dryer, an electric induction range, and oven, respectively. For hot water heaters, if the existing water heater uses natural gas, propane, fuel oil, or electricity at a lower efficiency level than a UEF around 3.4, the dwelling receives a heat pump water heater sized according to the number of bedrooms the home has. For pools and spas or hot tubs, spa and hot tub is interchangeable here. For those that are heated by natural gas, an electric heater replaces the current heater. And similar to the envelope upgrade measure packages, these measure packages will not apply to the dwelling model unless the heat pump also applies to the dwelling. So let's look at some example results that include these electrification measures. This figure features the measure packages that include the high efficiency cold climate air-to-air heat pump. So that's measure packages 2, 7, and 12. You can note the decrease in consumption due to the envelope upgrade, and then a slight increase in consumption for the electrification measures. This is due to increases in appliances and hot water end uses. But if we look at total energy savings between measure packages 1 through 5 and 11 through 15, one can see that total energy savings increase for the electrification measure packages for each respective heat pump iteration. This is likely due to more efficient appliances and water heaters replacing the existing stock's less efficient systems. Well, that's it for example results. Let's talk about a couple special outputs in our data set. So this data set includes carbon emission outputs. More specifically, we are publishing emissions using 4 data sets of long-run marginal emissions from NREL's Cambium 2022 dataset. The 4 use different NREL standard scenarios, which are long-standing NREL-developed projections of the future of the electric grid. They all use a start year of 2025 and are levelized with a 3% discount rate over either 15 or 25 years. The 15 or 25 years is meant to represent the lifetime of the decision. We used the month-hour time aggregations, which preserve time of day and seasonal trends without being tied to one weather year. And in calculating total carbon emissions, it's critical to consider not just the carbon emissions from changes in electricity consumption, but also from changes to on-site fossil fuel consumption, like fuel switching. For this, we used values from table 7.1.21 of the ANSI ResNet 301 publication. These include both combustion and pre-combustion carbon emissions. And a new addition to this data set is utility bills. Estimates for electricity, natural gas, propane, and fuel oil rates for each of the contiguous 48 states and DC were calculated using existing public data from NREL's utility rate database, the EIA, and the American Gas Association. At the time of publication of this dataset, that meant most of our utility bill data stems from the years 2021, 2022. Each state receives an average fixed rate for the fuel, as well as a variable rate that is then multiplied by the dwelling's fuel usage. Please note that these utility rates are only generalized estimates for each state, and when possible, specific energy rates should be used to calculate utility bills instead of these state averaged rates that are calculated in the data set. So, all right, the data set has been released to the public. So what are some use cases for it? Disclaimer, these are not exhaustive, but be thinking about how some of these potential questions might help your applications of the ResStock dataset. And first, let's talk about answering questions related to housing characterization and seeing a current snapshot of energy consumption. So questions like, how many homes are heated by electricity versus gas? How leaky or well insulated are these homes? How prevalent is one housing type or vintage versus another? What are the differences in their energy consumption? How are low income and renter occupied housing different from other housing units? What are the fuel types and end uses that provide the largest opportunities for efficiency and electrification? Secondly, questions about technology potentials and what if scenarios. So what is the range of savings per dwelling unit if measure package X, Y, or Z is implemented? And what would the total expected savings be for a community from those measure packages? What are the energy, carbon, and utility bill impacts of envelope improvements versus heat pumps with electric backup or existing heating as backup? And what are the long-term carbon emission implications of electrification based on different potential futures for the electric grid? And lastly, what kind of questions can be addressed with time series? So does residential electrification shift a residential sector from summer peaking to winter peaking? What is the total change in peak demand from electrification or efficiency measures? How do higher efficiency equipment or envelope improvements affect the change in peak demand? And what are the bill impacts of different measures under state average utility rates? So you know these use cases. How can you access the data? There are about 5 different ways to access the data, and I'll walk through each of them. First, we have a set of files called the metadata and annual files. These include all of the dwelling unit characteristics for every model and annual outputs for energy consumption, carbon emissions, and utility bills, by upgrade and by fuel. The state-level files are small enough to open and work with easily in Excel. The full national ones can be used on a personal computer, and we've had some success using them in Excel. That is to say, these metadata and annual files are intended to be user-friendly data sets. They look a little like this. There's a lot of columns. There's simulation info columns, baseline characteristic columns, energy consumption columns, emissions columns, energy savings columns, emissions reduction columns, total bills savings columns, and columns for characteristics in the measure package that are different from the baseline. So there's a lot here. We know when a package didn't apply to a model, and the measure package energy consumption in that case is the same as baseline. And then please note that our model ID column is called building ID, even though it's a dwelling unit. We've been trying to be thorough and updating to dwelling unit, but this is one place it says building. The second way to access this data is through pre-aggregated time series files. These are housing stock totals by building type at various geographic levels: IECC climate zone, Building America climate zone, state, and ISO RTO regions. They include the energy consumption, energy savings, carbon emissions, and indoor air temperature, but do not have any metadata besides the number of models and number of dwelling units represented. Here's a screenshot. A few important things to point out. The data are in 60-minute time increments. The timestamps are time period ending, and they are in Eastern Standard Time. There's no daylight savings, and regardless of geographic location, it's Eastern Standard Time. This is true for all our time series results, no matter how you access them. The energy consumption and savings are in kilowatt hours. For electricity, yes, but also for natural gas, propane, and fuel oil. They all use kilowatt hours in time series, no matter how you access them. And like I said, these files include the number of models used to make the aggregation and the number of dwelling units represented by those models. Third, we have an in-browser graphical user interface for exploring the data. It does annual data, time series data, and building characteristics. What makes this fun is the type of filter combinations you can add to the data. For example, if you only want to see a particular vintage of homes in a particular geography, or only homes with an extra refrigerator, or only multifamily homes in a specific state. There's endless combinations. And because there's endless combinations, each particular filter combination is slow the first time to process. It can take several minutes, and it's slower with larger data sets. So slower for California than Delaware. There's a tutorial video up on the project website showing an example of how to use this data viewer with 2022.1 results. You can use this web data viewer interface to download custom aggregations of data with the Export CSV button. If you want time series, we recommend choosing the 60-minute resolution option. You'll get 60-minute data for the whole year, aggregated for the housing stock of the geography you're looking at, and then with any of the filters you applied. In general, the data you download here is very similar to the pre-aggregated data, just with your own filters applied. There are a few key differences. Carbon emissions, PV, and net load totals are not available. They are available in annual results, individual results, and pre-aggregated results. Also, it won't tell you how many models you've filtered down to. If you're applying strict filters, you run the risk of getting down to double-digit or single-digit number of dwelling models, which is not enough to draw good conclusions from. The approach we recommend is to do the same filtering in a metadata and annual file, so that then you can check how many models you are filtering to. Remember that these results are a statistical sample. Queries and aggregations of the data set that have small samples have high uncertainty, and while queries and aggregations with larger samples have lower uncertainty. We have more specific guidance in our technical documentation. And one last caveat, we generally discourage using time series aggregations made with TMY3 weather files. TMY3 weather is not aligned across weather station locations. So DC could be having the hottest day on record, while Baltimore, an hour away or so, depending on traffic, has an unreasonable cold snap. Using TMY3 time series results within a weather file location is fine, or aggregating annual results, but just be wary of aggregating time series. And finally, you can access the individual model files. We hope to have .osm files uploaded by the end of next week. And these OSM files should have more data than our previous releases. You'll be able to see the performance curves of the heat pump upgrades, for example. And there are 3 key places you may need to access all of the data, documentation, and model files. The 2018 and TMY3 data and basic documentation has already been uploaded to the AWS OEDI repository. In the coming days, the individual model files and data dictionaries will be uploaded to the ResStock Dataset site, and the web data viewer should be ready for you all to explore the dataset's contents within the next week. And that's all I have as far as the presentation. Remember, we'd love to hear any of your feedback or suggestions for future ResStock datasets. And if you're online, please stay for a question and answer session with the ResStock team. So yes, thank you all for attending.
All right, I have several questions that have come in through the Q&A, and so let's get started with those. We have several different questions related to the utility rate calculations. I'm going to start with this one, which is that utility rates are often time varying. When you did both the emissions and the utility bill calculations, are they calculated hourly, sub-hourly, and summed up, or are they based on annual values?
I believe our utility rates is just a fixed and variable rate for each state. Is that correct?
That's my memory as well.
Yeah,
and
so
it is detailed in the documentation.
Yeah, and generally our recommendation is do not use our utility rates if you're trying to model time of use type rates. So if you have a time of use rate, you can use our energy, our time series to calculate something with the time of use rate. And then what was the emissions part of that?
Similarly, are the emissions done with an annual or time series factor?
I believe time series with the Cambium. Different times of the day has different factor makeup.
Next question. Can you clarify the sizing approach differences between heat pumps 1 and 4?
Yes. Let's move up to that slide. Okay, so they're essentially sized the exact same. Your central ducted heat pump is going to be sized to ACA manual S&J, which sizes to cooling with that oversizing allowance. Since 1 and 4 are both single stage, if it's going to a home with ducts, that means a 15% oversizing allowance. And then if it's in a cold, dry climate, it'll get an extra ton of refrigeration. The non-ducted heat pump, the mini split, will be sized to max load as it's a variable speed heat pump.
All right, next question. Regarding the capacity retention of 90% at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, can you detail the source for that and specifically how it compares to models in the NEEP list of cold climate heat pumps?
Yeah, the source is the NEEP database. I don't think we chose a specific model. We wanted to see what kind of capacity retention fractions were being used for similar cold climate heat pumps as we're modeling. And we found that 90% at 5 degrees came up with a fair amount of the models. Nothing really higher than that, which is why both measure package 2 and 3, those heat pumps are the same capacity fraction.
All right, thank you. Next question. Do you publish the full performance curve for each type of heat pump, that is the capacity retention as a function of temperature curve?
We do now. This is the first data set that we will have that published. It'll be in those OSM model files. So if you wanted to look for those performance curves, you'll want to find a building ID of that received the heat pump you're curious about. And there should be a .osm file that outlines the performance curves and the capacity curves. And we're hoping to get that uploaded by the end of next week.
Next question. How do you model HVAC and domestic hot water systems that serve multiple dwelling units in multifamily buildings?
Ooh. Is there somebody on the ResStock team that knows that? I don't think I initially know the answer to that. Anybody with multifamily
Jeff, are you willing to take
knowledge?
that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So we do use some approximations. A lot of them are in the NC ResNet standard for trying to account for the impact of this being equipment that serves multiple buildings, but the models are generally pretty similar to what would be used if it was serving a single dwelling. So there's some slight adjustments to how it would behave for the single dwelling, but there's not an explicit model of a system serving multiple units.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, next question. How does the model determine if the building uses electricity and or natural gas for heating?
Yeah, so initially in baseline, it depends on the data, the source data, and the dependencies. So if it's a home in Florida, it's more likely to have a heating fuel of electricity rather than natural gas, where you'd see natural gas maybe more in the Midwest. So it's determined by that. And then the heating fuel might change because of one of these measure upgrades. So let's say we have a home with natural gas furnace and it got heat pump number 1, then that heating type would change to electric. But to answer your question, in the baseline, it's from our quota-based sampling methodology that picks from those distributions that are calculated from existing data like EIA and census data.
Next question, though this might be a pull-up documentation situation. What makes up the miscellaneous appliances?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so it is pool and spa heaters. It is well pumps. It is other things that I can double check on.
I don't actually think it includes pool and spa heaters. It's basically anything
And
that's the difference between the total energy consumption and the end uses that we break out.
are we talking about miscellaneous loads in the figures? Because the figures is going to be different. I was
Oh, I'm
listing off
sorry.
figures
I
because
assumed they meant the, all right, whoever asked that question, if you can clarify whether you mean the figures or the output in the results.
Yeah. I can say in the figures just so there's clarity. So the miscellaneous loads is plug loads, miscellaneous, pools, spas, and well pumps. And I think those are the 5 that it makes up. But I can double check.
Sounds good. Sorry for the confusion on that
Yeah,
one.
no worries.
All right, this is worded strangely, but I think what they're asking is, did you model a heat pump which is not a cold climate heat pump which would have existing and has existing electric resistance backup. For example, existing electrical heating, I assume, with a new heat pump with compressor lockout between 32 and 40 Fahrenheit.
Mm. So this is a non-cold climate rated heat pump, this number one. Now, what I do not think it has is compressor lockouts at that high of a temperature. I think its compressor lockout is pretty low. I think our default is like -20. So that electric resistance backup heat of this heat pump will kick on probably pretty early, you know, if it's going to negative degrees outside. So this would be if you're looking for a heat pump that's not cold climate rated, it's likely package number one. And if you want a package number one with existing heating as backup, that'll be number 4.
Next question, do the load shapes include electric backup heating on its own, not integrated with others? I assume they mean as an output field, but it's not clear.
Let's go to this. So can you repeat it?
Yes, do the load shapes include electric backup on its own, not integrated with others?
Okay, so like if I don't think that applies in our data set. I don't like where that would apply is with the back of his heating heat pump, but we only apply to dwellings who have existing fossil fuel. So there's no separate backup that goes off of electricity in this data set, if that's the question.
Even for heat pump 1?
For heat pump 1. Well, for heat pump 1, it's integrated.
But is it called out separately though? Is the heat pump?
Yeah. It's called out separately. So it, like in this annual result, it's this orange, and then in the load shape, the orange is right here. So this is all the integrated electric heat pump backup.
So
I
think
thought
the
they were
answer
asking about non-integrated.
I'm not actually sure which of the two they're asking. So if you want to know the breakdown between the two, then yes, we can do that. But we did not model a separate electric backup.
Yeah, the only separate backups we've modeled are fossil fuel systems that were existing in baseline.
All right, next question. We have a couple of questions about looking at summer peaks when there's no daylight savings adjustment. I think that's the general question. How should those be interpreted? How should you look for summer peak data when daylight savings is going to not be accounted
since
for?
Everything's at Eastern Standard Time. Yeah, so this is more of like a data wrangling problem. If you wanted accurate to your geography, say you're looking at Denver, Denver Mountain Daylight Time compared to Eastern Standard Time would be, what would that be? Probably 1 hour, I think, difference. So you probably want to shift your x-axis by an hour to see when that peak actually happens in the local geography.
I think the other thing I want to mention here is that the schedules are shifted for daylight savings. So behavior wise, we are taking daylight savings into account. That's just not, it's just a unit conversion issue. So the units that we're outputting in happen to be Eastern Standard Time, but everything is happening correctly, knowing where there is daylight savings and where there is not daylight savings in terms of adjusting the underlying schedules.
Yes. So our schedules, our behaviors follow the local time. And that's why you'd probably want to do that shift when you look at summer peaks, for example.
Next question, how are the changeover temperatures determined for all measure package heat pumps with the various backup sources?
Yeah, good question. Well, if you remember from 2022.1, we had a switch off temperature of like 40 degrees, and we asked experts in the field, especially internally at NREL, what would be a more sophisticated or more something that's more representative of what's happening in the field with these lockout temperatures. And you know, the people with expertise kind of helped us land on this 5-degree Fahrenheit compressor lockout and the 40-degree Fahrenheit backup heating lockout. We're looking for more guidance. I would say if you know of any published, reviewed guidance about these lockout temperatures, we would love to hear about it and possibly integrate it into future releases. So it's a work in progress. I think I've only seen like one published form of guidance on what to put these lockout temperatures at. So yeah, it's work in progress right now.
Someone's requesting UTC as well as Eastern Standard Time. We will take that under advisement.
Yep.
It's a reasonable request, but no
If you
promises.
if you want your request in hard writing, please email us at resstock@nrel.gov, and then we can you know, have it in our file system.
All right, there's a couple questions about what we will be publishing at the individual model level, both in terms of results and in terms of inputs.
So we will have individual model time series data that'll be hourly. We're going to have the individual model file in OSM file format. I believe we published the schedules. What else do we have here? And the weather data for the region that the individual model resides in.
And which of those are currently available?
What's currently available is the weather data.
And the results?
And the time series. What's not available is the OSM files and the schedule files.
Are the ducted dwelling units in Measure Package 4, which is the existing backup,
Yep.
the only use case with a compressor lockout temperature?
Every heat pump has a compressor lockout temperature. Its default, I believe, is -40 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not going to get triggered that much. So to answer your question, technically, no. It is the only heat pump with a compressor lockout temperature that is seen frequently in our weather files. Yeah.
Is there a way to integrate PV net metering with these load shapes, or how would you recommend someone integrate PV net metering?
Yeah, so we've had some peers try to do this, and essentially they take our load profiles and they take whatever geography they have, and they use the weather files that are online on OEDI to get the PV, you know, insulation and all those fun angles and stuff to model a PV generation. So was it behind the meter? Is that what we were trying to do?
It just says net.
Okay. So if you found a building model you really liked, you wanted to try this on, all the information is there to calculate your own PV generation profile.
All right, there's not a lot more. Feel free to keep putting anything in that you would like us to answer. And we can keep going. We can also do some text answers if that's better. But most of the answers that were specific for this data set we've addressed. So we'll hang out for a few more minutes, certainly at least until the top of the hour.
Great. Thank you all for attending and interacting, and you know, we enjoy hearing from you all. Please email us at resstock@nrel.gov with any questions or suggestions or crazy ideas you want to see in future releases. We are happy to hear from all of you. So it was a lot of fun. make this data set, I will admit. So I hope you can put it to good use and put it to use that we didn't even think of. Yeah, I appreciate everybody's time in attending this. And thank you again to the ResStock team. And Lindsay, thank you, Lindsay, for making this webinar happen.
All right, there's another one that's come in. Is it fair to use the time series aggregates to normalize energy use by dwelling area to then scale up the number of dwelling units, commenting on city growth, for example? I might take that one if that's okay.
Go for it. Yeah, it's a fun question.
Yeah, it is. Certainly that would be a quick way to do it. I might consider, if I was doing it, down selecting if you have a large enough sample size to start with, down selecting to the newer buildings and scaling those up to represent growth, because a typical new building is going to look more like a 2010s construction than a 1940s construction. If you don't have the sample size to do that, though, that would be a reasonably quick and not unreasonable approach to doing that.
One other thing I'll say about sample size is that I think another thing you can consider doing, if you look, for example, at a specific city, and there are cities that you believe have similar characteristics, and you can actually look at the statistical distributions to determine whether or not another city is comparable. So, for example, if you're interested in Philadelphia, it might be that other sort of large sort of Eastern Seaboard, Mid-Atlantic cities have comparable building stocks. And so you may be able to say, for the type of questions you're trying to answer, folding in additional models from, say, Baltimore might give you a large enough sample size for the particular questions you're interested in, or the upgrades that you're interested in. So you may be able to do that as well to augment your data set.
All right, another question. Will the building models or metadata include the tonnage of the heat pumps in each of the different scenarios?
I believe they do. They'll definitely be in the OSM file. But I believe you'll have the size of the heating system and cooling system in that annual file.
All right, does NREL plan on incorporating other fuels like wood or biomass or district steam into future releases? Not in the short term. We've done some, I don't know what the right word is. There are some, like Open Studio, I think, has increased support for wood, but there's no short-term plans to change the fuels that we are outputting. All right, I have gotten to the point where I can't tell. Is there anything else that any of the other panelists are seeing that we want to elevate to Phil? Oh, this is probably a Jeff question. Does the individual building model use single zone per floor or multiple zones?
The entire building is modeled as single zone. We don't have any advanced zoning in the building models at this point.
Alina, one other question we could address is whether or not the sizing of the equipment is included in our outputs and where for individual models.
I think we covered that, right?
Yeah, I think we covered that.
Yep.
Great.
Yes, can you go over again which of the upgrades address ground source heat pumps and how?
Yeah, let's do that. I'll just get to the long list here. So the geothermal heat pump is upgrade package 5. And then upgrade package 10 is the geothermal heat pump plus light touch envelope improvements. And then heat pump pack or measure package 15 is the geothermal heat pump plus light touch envelope improvements plus the electrification packages. So you're looking for 5, 10, and 15.
All right, I think we're heading towards the top of the hour. Please do reach out at resstock@nrel.gov if you have outstanding questions we didn't answer, or if you have, I don't know, requests, thoughts about what we should be doing in the future. Before we wrap, we do definitely need to thank all of the support that we've gotten from the Buildings Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy, especially to our technical manager, TM, Dale Hoffmeyer, who's been great through this process and always full of ideas for us.
We'd also like to thank GTO for their support in adding ground source heat pumps into this run. It wouldn't have been possible without them. So thank you.
All right, Lindsay, we'll leave it to you to close up.
Thank you all. This session has been recorded and we will share a link out as soon as it is available. Thank you.